Judge Neil Gorsuch set to be sworn in as the 113th Supreme Court Justice on Monday. The final tally was 54 to 45 in favor of confirmation after Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell employed the so-called nuclear option to overcome a filibuster. Judge Gorsuch's confirmation also restores a conservative majority on the High Court. Barbara Smith is here. She's a former law clerk to Justice Samuel Alito. She also worked in the White House counsel office for President George W. Bush. Good to have you here.
Thank you.
Okay, first, if I could get your reaction to the simple majority rule change.
Well, I think it's a great thing, and frankly, I think it's a bridge that the Senate crossed years ago when Senator Harry Reid decided to invoke the nuclear option for federal appellate judges. I mean, I think the federal courts of appeals are just as important as the Supreme Court, and if you're going to hold senators to that standard for the Court of Appeals, it makes sense that that would also be the standard for the Supreme Court.
You know, if you look at his records as an appeals court judge, speaking of the appeals court, it suggests that Justice Gorsuch will side with fellow conservatives in most cases. And as you well know, on the docket, there are several cases that raise critical questions about the separation of church and state. You have a Second Amendment case on whether citizens have the right to carry guns outside of their homes, and whether or not to consider a Republican backed law in North Carolina that tightened voting rules there. And of course, you have the executive order, the president's executive order on immigration and refugees. As you know, if the appeals courts don't restore the order, that can make it to the Supreme Court of the United States. So now Justice Gorsuch, a big appointment for President Trump.
I think that's certainly right, although I have to confess that as a conservative and a lawyer, the thing that I'm most excited about with Justice Gorsuch isn't that I think he'll come out a particular way on important questions of religious liberty or the Second Amendment or right to privacy, but rather that he has an approach to the law as a textualist and an originalist that means that he'll sort of find the outcome according to what the law says. He'll take the law as it comes to him without favoring a particular party or a particular side. And, you know, at the end of the day, I think that's a good thing for the institution and the independence of the courts.
You know, in the wake of the nuclear option, how do you think the air of acrimony will cloud the future of lawmaking decisions in Congress, as well as the impact on future seats to be filled?
Sure. Well, I think the Senate will continue to be a partisan and a political place as it's designed to be. I can't tell you, because I'm not a Senate expert, whether it's more or less acrimonious now than it was, for example, when someone like Judge Bork was nominated, or when Justice Thomas was nominated. Those were also very contentious nomination and confirmation processes for those two nominees. And so I think, you know, the political branches will continue to be political, and it's my hope that the Supreme Court will continue to be more independent and judicious, more reserved, and from my perspective, a little less powerful.
So, you know, in terms of this nuclear option, as you well know, there are 3 seats that could possibly come up for grabs, if you will, in the near future. How do you think that's going to play when that approaches? And that becomes a reality?
I think that Sure. I think the Trump administration did a really wonderful job of, you know, putting out a list of potential nominees, vetting them carefully, and then deciding to choose Judge Gorsuch. I think he's, you know, an incredible choice to fill Justice Scalia's seat. And if other seats become vacant in the coming years, as I suspect, you know, they might or they may, I hope that the Trump team is ready and willing to go with the next Justice Gorsuch to fill those.
Right, but if we're looking at a simple majority, then of course you have, you know, the other side of that coin, the Democrats, the liberal side, that they could employ that same option.
Sure. And, you know, as long as Republicans continue to hold a majority in the Senate, I think it'll be a good thing for nominees like Judge Gorsuch. And if Democrats took over control of the Senate after the midterm elections or at some point in the future, then obviously, you know, the pendulum will swing the other way and they'll get to put their nominees up and confirm them with a simple majority vote. So the shoe, I think, will be on the other foot at some point in the future. And, you know, that'll be the Senate Democrats' prerogative at that point.
Yeah. In the meantime, it's not on that other foot. It is on the foot of the Republicans. Right. But, you know, Barbara, many times voters don't always pay attention to the midterms. They are looking at the big, you know, the big tickets, the presidential races. But this is when these types of issues in voting becomes very important, when you're looking at putting the majority in Congress. So do you think the fact that you have 3 seats that will be up at some point sooner than later in the near future, considering how long the justices are allowed to, you know, it's a lifelong appointment, do you think people will pay attention when the time comes?
Well, I certainly think voters were paying attention last November when Justice Scalia's seat was up, and they knew that whoever won the presidential election would be the person filling that seat. And frankly, I think the reason that it was so hard for some red state Senate Democrats to decide how they were going to vote on the filibuster, people like Senator McCaskill in Missouri or senators in West Virginia or Montana, is precisely because their voters are paying attention to the federal courts, and they are paying attention to how these senators are voting on particular nominations. So, I think that's precisely what made this vote hard. It will, I hope, continue to make votes in the future equally hard, and that's a good thing for the integrity of the court because it means voters are paying attention to who the nominees are.
Okay, Barbara Smith, thank you so much. We have to leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Police in Oslo, Norway.